In an era of political confusion and martial bluster, the offer of the newly elected Pope Leo XIV to host direct Russian-Ukraine peace talks at the Vatican emerges not merely as a gesture of goodwill, but as an act of deliberate and intelligent diplomacy. While the Ukraine negotiations faltered, with Putin notably absent and Trump dangling promises of intervention like a Broadway understudy unsure of his cue, Leo's intervention has the weight of history, the credibility of neutrality, and the moral force of an institution that has in the past, like for example John the 23rd, helped prevent catastrophe, and nuclear catastrophe at that. The war in Ukraine, now over 3 years old, has claimed hundreds of thousands of lives and displaced millions. And despite intermittent negotiations, prisoner swaps and back-channel diplomacy, the conflict has reached a grim equilibrium. Static fronts, civilian casualties, diplomatic inertia. And the recent Istanbul summit achieved little beyond a symbolic prisoner exchange of 1,000 individuals from each side. President Zelensky showed up, President Putin couldn't be bothered. That absent tells a story. Into this void steps Pope Leo XIV. Only a week into his papacy, he's already made Ukraine a defining priority. In his first Angelus blessing, he declared solidarity with the beloved Ukrainian people. Days later, he spoke directly to Zelensky, reiterating the Vatican's desire to assist in reuniting deported children with their families, and offered the Holy See as a neutral venue for peace negotiations, which he's repeated again today. Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Leo's Secretary of State, confirmed the Vatican's readiness to hold direct talks, calling the failure in Istanbul tragic and describing the offer not as a plan but as a standing readiness and availability of place. The Holy See is one of the very few global institutions whose diplomatic neutrality is both credible and time-tested. The Vatican is not encumbered by trade deals, military alliances, or economic sanctions. It cannot offer tanks or tariffs, but it can offer something else: trust, seclusion, and moral clarity. And it's the same Vatican that facilitated the US-Cuba talks in 2014 and that brought warring South Sudanese leaders to the same room, famously leading to Pope Francis kissing their feet in a plea for peace. This is the Vatican that mediated between Khrushchev and Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962, and this is the Vatican Leo XIV now offers to use once more, not for theatrics but for settlement. Pope Francis pursued peace in Ukraine with admirable tenacity, but this message is not as muddled. Pope Francis's early statements criticizing NATO barking at Russia's door caused consternation in Kyiv and delight in Moscow. Leo XIV, by contrast, has adopted clarity. He refers to Russia's invasion as an imperialist act. He speaks of just and lasting peace, and unlike his predecessor, he appears unafraid to engage directly with power, including power of the secular kind, and that includes the United States, though the situation there is far from coherent. Vice President J.D. Vance in Rome for Leo's inauguration offered guarded support for the Vatican's involvement, praising its humanitarian efforts, particularly in facilitating the return of Ukrainian children. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio, while similarly diplomatic, stressed that the Vatican was a venue rather than a broker. And this semantic hesitation reveals more than it conceals. Washington is unsure. Washington may be losing the leading role in this initiative. President Trump, meanwhile, is both the potential deus ex machina and the central cause of disarray. Trump has floated a one-on-one meeting with Putin as the only route to peace, reportedly asserting that the Russian president won't negotiate unless he, Trump, is involved. In his typically theatrical style, Trump has promised phone calls, teased messages, and issued truth social declarations in capital letters, but delivered nothing. Even Republicans in Congress appear divided. Some are pushing for tougher sanctions and more weapons. Others cling to the illusion that Trump might, with sufficient swagger, force Putin to the table. And here lies the danger. While Leo XIV offers a process rooted in neutrality and human dignity, Trump and Putin risk turning negotiations into a show trial for their own egos. For Ukraine, this is perilous. Any talks that exclude Kyiv or predetermined territorial concessions, including the de jure recognition of occupied territories or blocking NATO accession, are non-starters. Zelensky has made that clear. His recent joint call with leaders from the UK, France, Germany and Poland signals his effort to keep the democratic world united and firmly against premature compromise. So what now? The Istanbul talks offered a prisoner exchange and little else. The Vatican's offer is not a solution, but it is a stage, one with history, symbolism, and rare moral capital. Leo XIV has opened a door, but for peace to enter, the players must be willing to act. And that means confronting Putin's duplicity, Trump's erraticism, and ensuring Ukraine's agency is never sacrificed for spectacle. Leo XIV has said, "Those who make history are the peacemakers." He's right. Peace is not made by those who shout loudest on social media or stage diplomatic cliffhangers. It's made by those who convene quietly, negotiate earnestly, and remember that the human cost of war is not just strategic, it's moral. And for those people who say, oh, well, the main players never get together at the beginning, it's always decided by the minor boffins first, and then the main players, the Putins and the Trumps and the Zelenskys, come along to sign the deal. That is not necessarily true. And the Istanbul option was an option for the main players to at least attend and shake hands, or at least be seen in the same room, or at least be seen in the same city. That would have been a start, but Putin ducked that responsibility, as incidentally did Trump. So it's no good just saying, oh, well, it was always going to be the boffin's job. No, that wasn't actually what was proposed. In the end, diplomacy is not about who gets credit. Diplomacy is about who gets home alive, who wins, who can salvage peace out of this mess of war. If Pope Leo can remind the world of that, then his papacy will already have mattered in barely a week.